I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and today we're looking at the ultimate BMW M2. This is, of course, the new BMW M2 CS, a car that was delayed a little bit because of the pandemic, but now it's June 2021 and we're finally getting a drive of the M2 CS on the road. And I'll foreshadow the rest of this review by saying the CS has been worth the wait. Now, the CS, or Club Sport version of the M2, is basically the swan song of this generation of BMW 2 Series. Many argue that this is the best car BMW currently make, or at least the truest car to the history and the heritage of the BMW brand. It's small, it's light, it's rear-wheel drive, it has a 6-cylinder engine up front, and it's truly focused on performance driving. Now, this particular M2 CS I have here is wearing the hero specification for this car. This color is Misano blue, and we've also got the $1,000 optional 19-inch matte gold wheels wrapped in Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2 tires. Now, as standard, the CS comes on Pilot Supersport road tires, but the Cup 2s are really what you'll want if you're going to be doing track driving in this car. Perhaps not exactly the tire you'd want on a rainy Sydney winter's day like this one, but we'll have some shenanigans with that later. In today's review, we'll check out the interior, take a quick cursory look in the boot, and then we'll head out on the road. When the CS version of the M2 was announced last year, it initially shocked everybody with the price. BMW Australia were upfront immediately saying it was going to cost $140,000 when it got to Australia, and indeed it did in 6-speed manual form, which I have driven on track at Phillip Island in Victoria. However, if you wanted to go for the dual clutch automatic version, and that transmission is fitted to this car here, the list price was just over $147,000 for this car. Now, however you look at it, that's a lot more expensive than an M2 competition, which has the same basic engine, the old M3 and M4 3-litre inline 6-cylinder motor. The M2 competition costs $109,000. However, the thing was, even though the CS was expensive, BMW had absolutely no trouble finding buyers. Just under 90 examples of the car came to Australia, and there are only 2 left in stock. Both of them are demonstrators, painted Misano blue with black wheels and the automatic gearbox, and both of them are priced at $160,000. So if you want to find yourself a cult classic M2, probably the best of this generation, then that's what it's going to cost you. So what do you actually get for that amount of money? Well, you get an interior that gives you everything you need and not much more. It's basic in here in a pleasant way, where the fixtures and the fittings are actually still really high quality, but it's just not swamped in technology. And for those that still want a fast 2-door BMW that doesn't feel like it's totally digital, there are still analog sensors to this car, the M2 CS is going to work for you. Because even though we have BMW's iDrive system, it stays out of your way, it's easy to control with this rotary dial. You do get wireless Apple CarPlay as standard, so that's just seamless. But then in front of you, we have analog gauges, really handsome. The digital stuff is kept to a minimum. We just have standard air conditioning, single zone, no dual zone climate, no heated seats. It's just one dial does temperature, the other buttons here do fan. It couldn't be much easier than that. That being said, this is an expensive car, and BMW have thrown a few luxury fittings at it too. For example, we are sitting on merino leather seats here. They're a match for far more high-end BMW cars, extremely soft and supple leather, red stitching, really cool seats, nice M tricolour stripes on them. But most of the rest of the material used in here is Alcantara. So as you can see, there's no centre armrest, but there is this bridge in Alcantara and carbon fibre. Alcantara detailing up here on the dash with the CS lettering, Alcantara in the doors, and on this large diameter steering wheel with M stitching, very, very intricate. Metal paddle shifters too, that's important in a performance automatic in my opinion, though if there was still any remaining, I would have recommended the manual. All the other stuff is, soft touch and perfectly nice for a BMW. Now, in a slightly amusing sense, you do still get fully electric seats with memory and Harman Kardon. So it's not a CSL, it's not a Club Sport Licht or Light with everything pulled out of it. It is still a fairly luxurious ride, but you don't get the sense that it's too overdone. Driving position's good, view out is good. You see that beautiful power dome on the bonnet. All in all, it's a comfortable and supportive place to sit. Now, we do have back seats, 2 of them. Not massive, but the 2 Series is practical enough if you do need to get people into the back here and there. So why is the M2 CS so much more expensive than the M2 competition? Well, there are a few reasons for it. Some of them are realistic. There's more carbon on this car, so we've got a carbon bonnet, carbon roof, carbon front splitter, carbon rear diffuser, lip spoiler here, and the mirrors, so there is some expense that goes into that. But as usual with these sorts of cars, a lot of it is to do with rarity. Now, this is the final edition of the current BMW M2, a hallowed car in the history of modern classic BMWs, and having that badge on the boot is absolutely worth something. Way less CSs have come to Australia than the competition, and of course that means that these cars are going to be a lot more rare in the future. Whether that justifies the price is of course up to you. You can let me know down below this video. But being a sort of two-door sedan, really, the BMW 2 Series is practical, and so is the CS. Open up the boot, you'll find 390 litres of boot space, which is heaps. You'll get quite a few suitcases in there for a weekend away, no trouble. So, compared to some other vehicles that compete with the M2 CS on performance, this one is actually going to be a lot more livable day to day. Just before we jump in and drive, let's chat running costs. Now, this is a complicated BMW performance car. Nobody buys the M2 CS for cheap running costs, but it does help to go in with a realistic view of what this car is going to cost you. Now, the service intervals, like other BMWs, are every 12 months or 15,000 kilometers, but the services don't come cheap. However, there is one way to minimize the cost of the maintenance, and that's by purchasing one of BMW's upfront service packs. Now, these last for 5 years and 80,000 kilometers, and they travel with the vehicle to any subsequent owners. Now, the basic pack costs just under $3,000, and that's just your scheduled servicing, your oils, filters, etc. Or you can go for the Plus package, which costs $8,800. Now, that's a lot, but it is going to get you a clutch service every year. It's going to get you brake changes. It's going to get you wipers, all that sort of additional stuff on top. And if you drive this car as it's intended to be driven, then no matter if you buy a BMW's pack or not, you are going to have quite a lot of maintenance costs. Now, the warranty on the car is sadly only 3 years, and that's not particularly competitive with Mercedes-AMG, who offer 5 years of coverage here in Australia. Now, fuel consumption, of course, it does depend on how you drive it. If you're just cruising on the highway, sort of 9 litres per 100 Ks is realistic. Around town in the suburbs, if you're going to be revving it right out, then you can expect 15 litres per 100 Ks or more. My driving combined netted about 12.5 litres per 100. So then, what is the ultimate BMW M2 like to drive? Let's find out. Fizzing with feel would be the first way I would describe this car. Now, I'm pretty convinced this is the best car BMW have made, at least in the last decade, and the trajectory BMW have been on has been a bit of a weird one, hasn't it? Because clearly, as the company has realized that buyer preferences have really shifted from what BMW used to do, which was small, relatively light and uncomplicated rear-wheel drive 6-cylinder cars, towards bigger, heavier, more technology-orientated crossovers. You know, the core of BMW DNA, a lot of people, including myself, were worried that it was being lost. But clearly, there's still a crack team inside BMW, still churning out cars like the M2 CS, but also, to some extent, or to a major extent, cars like the M550i that I reviewed the other week. Hopefully you've seen that video. And even cars like just a run-of-the-mill G23 series. Really, really good car. Clearly there's like an A team in BMW who does this stuff, and then another team who is assigned to do the other cars, I suppose you would say. Now, don't get me wrong, I quite like the X7. I actually think I'd happily have one if I needed a car of that size and type. But naturally, it's a very different proposition to a lightweight special, small, highly powerful rear drive coupe like the M2 CS. Listen to that engine. Bloody hell. So I've spent about 600 Ks in this car so far. I feel like I know it quite well now, and I'm going to walk you through why it's special. So we'll start with that engine. It's the S55, which was the 3-litre twin-turbo inline-6 that went into the old M3 and M4. And it's quite different to the N55, which was the first engine that went into the M2, just the straight M2. That was a single turbo 3 litre that made 272 kilowatts of power. Then the S55 was slotted into the competition, which is really good value, by the way. And now the S55 is also used in the CS, but with more power. The full 331 kilowatt whack that you got in the M3 and M4 in the previous gen, the generation with proportionate grills like this car. And there's also 550 Newton meters of torque. And look, that torque in some ways defines the experience, but the great thing about the S55 is it does love a rev. And the thing is, I have to downshift to second here. Listen to that, I mean, twin turbo, and yet huge 7,600 RPM fuel cut. So you can kind of drive it how you want. You can rev it out like an old BMW 6 and enjoy that sonorous engine note and just the frenetic nature of the engine up in that part of the rev range, or you can drive it on torque, because there's heaps of it. 550 Newton meters, not far off idle, so it'll pull in virtually any of the 7 forward gears in this MDCT automatic. Now, speaking of the auto, I've now driven both this DCT and the 6-speed manual version quite extensively. The manual mainly on track and the DCT mainly on road. That would be the split. But the thing is, they both are good transmissions in their own right. Now, I do agree with some of my professional colleagues that the manual that the manual gearbox that's available for this car isn't the be-all and end-all of manuals. Something like a Civic Type R manual is a better example of a stick-shift gearbox. But there's kind of a flag-bearing nature to the M2 CS manual. Possibly one of the very best BMW manuals or manual cars that you can buy, so I get it. And the thing is, they're all sold. There's only 2 M2 CS left in stock, and they're both autos. Thankfully, the MDCT is a superb gearbox, asterisk. Asterisk is at speed. Now, there have been some tweaks to the gearbox over time, and it is easier to drive the M2 CS at low speed than when the M3 and M4 first came out, the old gen cars with this drivetrain. But it's not like a Golf R DSG or something at low speed, which is like very tractable and slick and silky and stuff these days. It can be jerky and weird, the M2 CS Auto, just pottering around town. But then you get it out on a great road like this, and man, it makes you think this is the gearbox to have. Alacritus shifts, tactile paddles, rev matching on the downshifts. Left to its own devices, it's got 3 modes of aggression. I'm in the middle one, and shifting myself. That feels about right. But it kind of doesn't matter whether you end up with a manual or an auto of this car, because they both do have their charms. Of course, both of them are hooked up to the same lovely chassis, which is what the M2 CS is all about. I'm not going to go and pretend this car is going to be everything to all people, because it isn't that comfortable. It's quite loud in the cabin, but it's very focused, it's very well damped, and this car has so much more feel through each of its control surfaces than most modern BMWs, or most modern cars, full stop, not just BMW. Now, others have already spoken about the steering of the M2 CS, which is good. Now, I wouldn't say that the steering is brimming with heaps of feel. There's certainly above average feel compared to most steering racks that we drive these days, but compared to something like an E46 M3, it's certainly not as analog and as communicative as that. But the thing is, there's so much feel through the other control surfaces as well that this new car adds up to be one of the most feelsome new cars that you can buy. Now, the M2 CS does a lot of steering through its rear end, particularly on Cup 2s, which are an option on this car and are fitted to this particular blue test car I'm driving, and particularly in Sydney's winter, where we typically get these days where it will rain in the morning, and then in the afternoon like this, it's very nice out, but a shady road like the one I'm driving on now has these wet and dry patches. Now, if you find a patch which is slick, you actually have to exercise a little bit of patience getting on the power, because the CS is so torquey and those tires are so focused on dry grip that they really will just be induced into oversteer on very, very moderate throttle. Now, personally, I love that. It means you can totally adjust the M2 CS on your right boot. Even in ESC completely on, you get a bit of adjustment. But then, this being an M car, we have BMW's terrific M dynamic mode halfway house ESC, which will give you a little bit of latitude, just like that, but it's not going to let you spin the car unless you do something really stupid. Now, what is great about the steering is the really, really quick ratio. Also, this feelsome steering wheel. You know I don't love Alcantara wheels, but I'm just going to indulge for a minute. The car gets turned in well. Despite that 3-litre engine, it is pushed back towards the firewall to try and relieve weight over the front axle, but it gets turned in well. Front end grip on the tyres is superb. And then you just feed in that throttle linearly, feel the back start to step out, but it doesn't step out. It just shuffles the back of the car around to let you face straight out of the corner so you can boot the throttle. Throttle response is excellent for a turbocharged engine. Now the suspension, focused is the word. Firm, definitely. Stiff, yes. But there's a difference between firm and crashy and firm and ultimately compliant, and that's what you get here. No doubt about it, you see a bump, you feel a bump. Drive the M2 CS into a huge pothole and you're gonna know about it. But the thing is, the car actually does a pretty bang up job of breathing with a B-road surface like this one. It doesn't have you wincing the whole time and how uncomfortable it is. It is ultimately compliant. But, you know, for you, it may or may not be on the edge of what you'd want to use as a daily. You'd have to test drive and find out. But the dampers are excellent, they're adaptive. I've actually driven the car in the softest damping mode the whole week, because even that is still sporty enough, absolutely. Stiffer than that, we're talking about racetrack use, or like a beautifully smooth Spanish B-road or something, which I don't have much of a chance of driving anytime soon, sadly. Refinement, moderate. It gets loud in here because there's less sound insulation, particularly in the wheel wells. You hear every bit of gravel. Yeah, whatever. One thing that is great is it's not actually chock-a-block full of safety tech. So we have manual cruise control. We just have basic AEB. We don't have lane keep. We don't have blind spot. We don't have rear cross traffic alert. Now, on a family SUV, I would consider that a huge negative, but this is a BMW M2. In many ways, it feels like the last of its kind. Yes, there's a new M2 rear-wheel drive on the horizon. That's awesome. We'll see what that's like. But if I was tossing up about buying this one, and I had the money for it, I'd do it. So, with 2 of these M2 CSs left in stock in Australia, that just leaves us with the question, should you buy one of them? And if you love your BMWs, if you've been waiting for the best manifestation of the M2, if you prefer your sports cars to be a little bit more analog than digital, then the answer is absolutely, go for it. They are expensive, but they feel expensively made, and there's a huge amount of brawn to this car above and beyond other M2 variants, even though the M2 competition is undoubtedly still better value for money. There is rarity and exclusivity to the CS, let's be honest. Now, both of those cars in stock are wearing black wheels. That's not my preference, so I'd probably order an accessory set of the gold ones, but that's just me. You can let me know your thoughts down below this video, what you think about the M2 CS, whether you're waiting to see what the new rear-wheel drive 2 Series is going to be like. While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and that notification bell so you don't miss out. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.